there's talk about bone density loss, cognitive function being impaired, stunted growth, sexual function or dysfunction, and also kids who take puberty blockers have a higher likelihood of then going on to cross-sex hormones as well, which they themselves come with even greater damaging risks, such as infertility. So it's a very serious medical path. I cannot see anything that justifies this kind of risk to children.
Clare Page talks about plans to trial puberty blockers on children as young as 10. We discuss why there's been an explosion of children saying they were born in the wrong body.
I think we have a tremendous amount of propaganda taking place. I've seen it in schools, I've seen it from the whole RSE, so relationships and sex education sector. We see it in medicine, social media, and actually I would say politically as well. You know, this has been a pan-Western, huge propaganda machine.
As a campaigner for transparency in schools, Clare explains how activism in the classroom damages family relationships at home.
I've just done a study looking at books that discuss transgender identity and finding out how many of these books are in schools. And some of them are incredibly persuasive in how they're announcing this ideology to children. And what some of them say is, you don't need to tell your parents about this. And so they're actually attacking the trust and relationship between parents and children.
Welcome to British Thought Leaders. I'm Lee Hall. Today I'm sitting down with researcher and campaigner for transparency in schools, Clare Page. Clare, great to have you with us.
Hi, yes, good to be back.
So I wanted to talk to you first about these puberty blocker trials. I mean, a year ago, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting kind of banned puberty blockers for under 18s. There were fears over whether they're harmful or not. But now we're seeing this trial for children get the green light. Can you talk to us a bit about what the trial involves and why you think there was a U-turn there?
Yes, well, actually, I think possibly there hasn't been a U-turn. I think this is this is what was planned all along. Right. I think people misunderstood actually what happened around about the time of the Cass review, which was a moment where we had seen a scandal, if you like, at the Tavistock clinic, where it was thought that puberty blockers medication was being handed out indiscriminately almost, and that there was a model where you affirmed children in a transgender identity and put them straight towards a medical pathway. So I think there was a correct understanding that it was bringing in a huge cohort of children who perhaps shouldn't be on this medicine. And so things were reviewed. There was a ban to stop this indiscriminate prescribing, including in the private sector. And people who were against this medication, I perhaps had a false sense of hope there that we were on a trajectory to ending gender medicine for children. But actually, if you read the Cass review at the time, it's there in black and white that she intended for a proliferation of gender clinics to assess a wider cohort of children who are having issues with gender, and that they would potentially go on to a clinical trial for puberty blockers. So really it was a moment where they were transitioning from a wide and indiscriminate cohort, which was in a way being conducted in a rogue fashion, and putting it into a legitimised way with perhaps a smaller cohort of children. But there was never actually any sense that maybe this shouldn't be done at all. So I think we've just arrived at the point where this is now being legitimised into what is said to be mainstream science rather than just what was happening at the Tavistock.
What are the risks of puberty blockers and interfering with puberty, and how do you see these trials from an ethical standpoint?
Yes, well, I'm not a doctor, so I can't claim to know this, but let's just go by what the Cass report itself, refers to as the risks. So there's talk about bone density loss, cognitive function being impaired, stunted growth, sexual function or dysfunction, and also kids who take puberty blockers have a higher likelihood of then going on to cross-sex hormones as well, which they themselves come with even greater damaging risks, such as infertility. So it's a very serious medical path. These are not slight side effects. So ethically, you would have to have an enormously good reason to be medicating on a trial children with this kind of significant outcomes. And I cannot see anything that justifies this kind of risk to children. If we actually look at the very first line of the CAST review in her foreword, she makes it clear that she doesn't define what it is to be trans. So effectively, we're medicating a condition that hasn't been defined properly and does not have an objective definition and a material definition in biological science. For me, that's a huge step into an unethical realm.
So just on that, for these trials, or even for a school, when they say this child is trans, what scientific basis is that on?
Well, actually, none, as far as I'm concerned, that I've seen or understand. The CAST review discusses the biological basis for transgender identity and makes it clear that there isn't one. It discusses some studies that have found correlations that suggest maybe there's a pattern to it, but there is no biological basis to this condition. It is purely one that is psychologically expressed. So it's a real Rubicon to cross, to start medicating psychological distress by altering the body.
As a parent, why would you put your child into a trial like this? I mean, they must have a reason.
Yeah, I'm sure most parents would do that out of care and thinking it's for the best. And as a sort of person who advocates parent voice and responsibility, I wouldn't want to diminish a parent's role. But it's very different when we're talking about medical science. We don't give cancer drugs to children because a parent is convinced the child has cancer. We do it because empirical testing shows the child is ill in an objective sense, and the medical profession recognises it and can do something. This is something very different. But we have to wonder why these parents are asking for this. So clearly some believe that their child is born in the wrong body. But actually, there are other reasons that parents make, really significant mistakes around this area. There's a condition called Munchausen's by proxy. That's where parents will have, they will be interested in their child having a medical condition because it seems important and exciting to take them to medical services. It can be, kind of a mistake of the parents' interest in that way. And then also, they've actually shown that children with transgender identities have a higher prevalence of abuse in their background as well. So we have to look at ways in which parents might have got this wrong, and certainly they might have got it wrong because also there's a tremendous amount of propaganda at the moment persuading people that this is a real condition.
The other thing I understand about these trials is that the child needs to kind of understand what it is and give informed consent. Do you think that's a realistic thing?
No, I don't. There is a condition, I think, there are situations where an adult can give consent on a child's behalf, but that would normally be a clear case of, a child is dying, there's an experimental medicine, and the medical profession feels it's in their best interest. But in this case, the idea that the child could consent here when the outcomes are things which relate to their adulthood just seems absurd. So if you're talking about heading towards infertility or sexual dysfunction or your full growth height potential, your cognitive ability in future life, a child cannot, especially these trials starting with children of 10, they cannot conceive themselves as an adult in that way. So I do not see how they can give informed consent to that at all.
What do we know about the kind of the protocols of how the trials will be run?
Yeah, so information about that is sort of seeping out, and people are starting to look through the actual documents and what the children will be experiencing on this trial. And some of that seems to be quite concerning. I mean, the first thing is that aside from the medical studies they're doing, there's obviously the key output that is hoped from these trials is that the children become happier in some way. So you've got serious medical studies put alongside psychological profiling, which itself is a very strange combination, really. But the psychological profiling demands that children, or requires, sorry, they don't have to fill it out, but it requires that children fill out questionnaires and surveys. And these are really quite intrusive questions. Some of them seem to be aimed at trying to assess the child's sexuality. So talking about their sexual experiences and feelings.
You're talking about 10-year-olds.
And the trial begins with age 10 upwards, and all of the children are under 16. So actually, it seems to be normalising the discussion of sex and sexuality for underage children, which, I mean, technically, should the children be answering that they've got experiences in this area, we're actually looking at a crime. But so there seems to be also a lot of gender ideology language embedded into these questionnaires. So instead of just having a very open assessment of what the child thinks, it will use terms like two-spirit as to whether they identify, in this way, which itself is that's imported from Canada. It's a concept that comes from Native Americans about not having a fixed masculine or feminine personality. It will probably mean absolutely nothing to British children. And it shows the degree of ideological leaning built into this trial, which really should have no place in medical science whatsoever.
When I was a child, I didn't know anyone who said they were born in the wrong body, whereas it seems now there's quite a few children who believe that. I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's possible for some kids who have behaviour that does not match the typical behaviour expected of their sex. They may have a very natural sense of discomfort about being a boy or a girl and what their behaviours are expected to be. That might be a sort of natural confusion. But for all the rest, I think we have a tremendous amount of propaganda taking place. I've seen it in schools, I've seen it from the whole RSE, so relationships and sex education sector. We see it in medicine, social media, and actually I would say politically as well. This has been a pan-Western, huge propaganda machine.
We had Professor Eric Kaufmann on recently, and he was saying the data show a sudden drop since 2023 of young people identifying as another gender, almost like it's kind of not cool anymore. And we're also seeing Girl Guides and some other organisations say they're no longer accepting biological males who identify as females. And if this is a fad, or even if it's a kind of psychosocial thing, but we're treating it with medicine and we're treating it with long-term operations, where does that leave us?
Yes, well, it's fascinating data from Eric Kaufmann. I perhaps wouldn't use the term actually fad or fashion. I don't think this is a natural phenomenon. I think it has been orchestrated by political propaganda, financial interests, and even quite malign interests in some cases. I think it's been engineered at a kind of global level with massive funding. I think it was actually, transgender ideology and LGBTQ as a moniker is actually a vessel for the previous Biden administration, Democrats before that. It was a vessel for a sort of hegemonic set of liberal principles that political force wanted to spread, and I think they put money behind it. I think social media also was kind of pro this and suppressed negative opinion against it, and we see lots and lots of smaller charities doing that work as well. So I think that it grew out of persuasion and propaganda as much as a natural fad. And if we see what's happened in America, we've had a change of guard, we've got a change of power base, and the Trump administration was very clear that he was against this and he would switch this off from the public sector in schooling, for example, there. So that pierced a bubble, I think, even before he was elected for the second time. He was saying that he would stand against child gender medicine. And I think that once that bubble was pierced, and you see also social media power moving to Twitter and X now, Elon Musk, the free speech was also permitted to pierce this bubble of thought. So it's not so much the fad has ended or it's out of fashion, it's just that the forces that oppose it stood up to that, and I think it changed the landscape. And then one more thing in that as well is the very brave, what they call detransitioners. It's not a term I would use because I actually don't think you can transition sex anyway. You can just take medicine to cosmetically alter things. But that group of people who have had damage from going through that process spoke up and showed the damage to themselves, and perhaps took legal cases as well. And so that also has pierced the bubble of belief.
One thing to add in terms of the propaganda and the support for this, there was the BBC report recently. They were talking about the Dr. Trump speech, but there were also a side of it of this kind of a team of reporters who were blocking any gender questioning reporting coming out of the BBC. So even the media's involved.
Oh, for sure. The media is a huge part of this. Huge. The BBC has lots of pro-transgender programming in their CBBS, the kids' channels. And it does look as if there were controlling editorial decisions as well to make a bias on that. Certainly I encountered bias personally with the BBC. So I had my legal case and was discussed on a programme to which I wasn't invited, but the RSE company that was involved in my case was invited to give a very positive kind of vision of their side of things.
It doesn't sound fair at all.
Well, they actually described me as parents acting in bad faith. So there was no right to reply to that. And then there was subsequent problem as well with Radio 4. So I've experienced it myself, and actually what I've seen is that people who have a contrary opinion, as I do, to gender ideology, actually just don't even engage with the BBC anymore because they don't have trust they'll be treated fairly. So that really, really creates an enormous bias in the centre of our media.
I wanted to ask you for your opinion on ways forward. So a lot of experts, they completely agree with what you're saying. There's also experts who say this is needed to plug an evidence gap, these trials, and that they're rigorous and they're ethically sound. So there's really opposing views. How do we find a way forward there? Yes,
it's very tempting to carry on with the kind of political landscape we have of compromise. I think we are suffering, as a nation, from this idea that all matters are relative, that everybody has different views, they're all as valid, and we have to find compromises, and that's the way you do governance, that's the way you do something professionally. I disagree. I think there are things where the ethics can be clearly and logically arrived at, and there are things which are right and wrong. And when things are wrong, we just have to say no. Things have to be halted and deal with the moral side of something. And so in this particular debate, I think that there is clarity that this medicinal trial is unethical. I think it can be established very, very simply, just on the grounds that it has no meaningful definition to the illness in the first place. So, and that's before you talk about the inability of children to consent to so I think we should be asking for our government, and if it's not this one, the next one, to say no to puberty blocker trials and medicating children for a mental condition. And in terms of the spread of gender ideology, I think we should be prepared to say that it shouldn't be in schools.
One other issue on this I thought was interesting is we're seeing on social media people saying puberty is a human right. In this kind of legal way, a kind of rights argument, do you think that's kind of, well, what do you think are the problems with that as opposed to just saying, leave the kids alone?
Yes, I mean, in some ways I think it might be at the heart of our problems to use rights-based decisions and governance. It's always a double-edged sword. If you have a right for one thing, do you have a right for another? So let's say we award a right for puberty and put it in some legal basis. Well, then somebody can say, well, my right to puberty ought to be to choose the puberty of the opposite sex. That's the puberty I want. Well, you're impinging my rights now if you insist I have a natural puberty.
Do you have a right to getting old? And then what about anti-aging products?
Yes, well, this is it. I mean, we end up with asking for a right for everything. And actually, it also legalises our decisions and turns them into decisions of sort of one person's right against another, and it becomes equivocal. You know, it becomes relativist again. And actually, I think government is better done assessing what is right and wrong, what causes harm and what doesn't. And I think we should be making our decisions based on that. There's a further problem to this particular movement. The group that are advocating a right to puberty have actually leveraged that off an instrument called the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, so the UNCRC. And they're suggesting under that legal and governance framework, that's where we should see that the right to the child is guaranteed. And yet, they perhaps don't realise that the UNCRC was defined to a great extent by a man called Peter Newell, who was convicted of child rape in 2018. And yet he wrote the handbook on how the UNCRC should be implemented in all the signatory countries. And into that handbook, he injected the idea of gender identity being one of the things that is your rights. So you have to be so careful with rights, because when there is a framework, it really matters who is controlling that framework. So that when you go to court to perhaps prove that you have a right to natural puberty, you might find yourself having the other side fight back and saying, well, actually, this rights-based framework proves you have a right to gender identity and the puberty that matches that. So, lawfare is a very inadequate way to deal with this. We need to deal with this in our parliament, where we can properly analyse everything and make ethical decisions.
So I was reading a review of a trans-inclusion school toolkit by a medical doctor who was kind of deeply concerned about what children are being taught in schools and the impact that would have. I know you've been campaigning on this kind of issue for a while. Why should parents be concerned about what their kids are being taught in school, especially sex education, gender, things like that?
Yes, well, in my experience, it has a very strong bias. That bias is towards LGBTQ plus activism, with an emphasis on the TQ plus activism, meaning the transgender ideology. Some of the academics who define this are extremely clear that their plan is to queer the classroom, as they will say, and to introduce these concepts to children in what I've found persuasive ways. So parents should be extremely alert to that. It is, I think, dangerous. I think it's a psychological intervention actually, and parents should be ready to oppose that, I think.
What is the impact on the parent-child relationship at home when these kind of ideologies are taught in school?
Yes, it's really good to point out that it is, to use the word relationship, because that's what this teaching comes in between very often. It can be really destructive to family relationships. I've just done a study looking at books that discuss transgender identity and finding out how many of these books are in schools. And some of them are incredibly persuasive in how they're announcing this ideology to children. And what some of them say is, you don't need to tell your parents about this. And so they're actually attacking the trust and relationship between parents and children. And so then children actually find that if they profess this identity and the school accepts it, and perhaps the parent is skeptical and doubts it, you actually start a situation where you're splitting the family apart, and where there have been cases where social services have got involved and sided with the school and the child's belief, and actually even separated the parent from the child. So it's a really it's a very serious effect on family cohesion.
I had a teacher friend, we were talking about this, and she said, well, why can't the parents just trust what the teachers are teaching? They don't need to know the content. Teachers are generally good people. How would you respond to that?
Well, of course, ideally, we should be in a position of trust. We should be in a society that has a good shared understanding of what we're teaching kids, and that would be ideal. And most teachers, of course, are great and doing just the right thing. But this particular ideology is so pernicious, and it has been applied in a very grooming kind of way, even to adults. So some teachers will be sure they're doing the right thing by advocating transgender identities. So I think that we can't rely on every teacher to get that right. I think parents have to be able to step in and say what's right for their child and take an interest in this. But I think there are wider issues here, actually, which is not just transgender issues. I think we need to look at indoctrination as a whole in the schools and understand that teachers have a collective effect upon a national cohort, which an individual parent can't have. We can talk and persuade and influence our own children if we wanted to, but that's the limit of our power. But actually, teachers as a whole are a collective force, and there can really be no doubt that it has quite a strong left-wing bias, that there is a unionised background to teaching, which can actually create one very strong bias for some political ideals. And so that collective force is something that parents ought to be able to go and check and say and speak back to if necessary. And good teachers, I think, will welcome earnest inquiries from parents.
I think a lot of the time these lessons that are taught on these kind of RSE, etc., they're not from, like, the maths teacher teaches maths, they're actually from these external companies. Can you talk to us a bit about the effects of that?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Well, that's at the basis of my legal case, which is that I wasn't allowed to see a lesson specifically because it had been produced by an external company, or at least I wasn't allowed to have a copy of it, at least. And that external company cited exemptions under the Freedom of Information Act, saying that if something is a commercial secret or is a secret piece of information, then it can be withheld from Freedom of Information requests. So there is a degree of secrecy, and it's a little bit hard to get hold of what that third sector are producing. And certainly in my research, it looks to me as if we have an incredibly biased sector there, one which has actually grown up sort of wanting to bypass parental responsibility, actually.
A kind of activism.
Oh, it's completely full of activism, totally. It is defined by charities who have particular rights-based agendas in mind, so Stonewall being one of the parent forces in all of that. And actually it goes internationally as well. So there are some, if you look at our relationships and sex education, it's actually based on an international standard called comprehensive sexuality education, something which was originally begun in the US by a kind of group called CICUS, which actually received funding right at the beginning from Hugh Hefner, would you believe? So that's the kind of, there's always been some privatized infiltration of sex education right from the beginning in the US. And that has been spread globally by UNESCO, the UN, to standards which actually are, I would say, highly dubious. And in order to get that standard into the UK, there has been quite a lot of bypassing of government, bypassing of parents, bypassing of Ofsted. And so we actually get this third sector operating outside of schools, but bringing their very contentious message into schools with a minimum of transparency.
The last time you were here, you talked about the legal challenges you're mounting to try and stop these secret lessons. Can you update us on that?
Yes, So my first appeal to the Information Commissioner's Office was in 2021. I then went to the first tier tribunal after I was declined to see this lesson plan, and now I've just heard the result from my upper tribunal hearing, which I lost. So unfortunately, it still stands that a parent trying to use the FOI Act to see lessons in schools can't access them that way. And that actually means that secrecy is now been recognised by a court to be acceptable in the classroom, which is really concerning.
One thing that puzzles me about this, if it's being taught to hundreds of children, but it's a trade secret, are they supposed to kind of keep the trade secret when they're in the playground or whatever?
I think it's a complete farce to suggest that secrecy can can pertain in schools. Very obviously, when RSE companies come in and deliver this teaching, they deliver it freely to dozens, maybe hundreds of children, and across all the schools they visit, thousands of children. So they're divulging the information very freely, and they don't, or at least they haven't till now, and they shouldn't, ask children to be involved in some form of non-disclosure agreement. And so the children can use this information. That actually really explodes the possibility of it being a proper trade secret. My intellectual property barrister makes it very plain that it's an elementary piece of IP law, that something that is going to be considered secret in the eyes of law needs to have had measures taken to keep it secret by the owner of that information. So they need to have asked for non-disclosure agreements to be signed. They need to have warned people they mustn't share this information anywhere, even with parents. And also the information would have to have the some sort of status of value, like, you know, like a drawing of a jet engine, brand new kind of innovation. And of course this is not the case with sex education. It's something that should be in the curriculum, that should be widely understood to be being taught to the children. So it's not got that status either. So really, we don't see how it can be considered a secret in the first place. But even if it were, it really shouldn't be, because that's going to impact on safeguarding. It's going to allow people to deliver things to information to children that, you know, parents can't access and check and do anything about. And certainly, I couldn't even use the evidence of the lesson in my kid's case at my governor complaint hearing. So the governors of the school couldn't see it. Ofsted couldn't see it. It's just unworkable.
Do you think, like, stepping back from this, there's a kind of ongoing ploy to undermine parents and kind of the state to take power away from them?
Yes, for sure, there is. I think, especially in RSE, but actually across the board, I think there is an increasing sense that central government should have some control over the teaching that's going on in schools. And that actually, kind of both main political parties have had a hand in that, actually. Whether it's sort of advancing the RSE curriculum and making it so that parents, in Wales, for example, you cannot withdraw your child from that curriculum. So it's completely compulsory, and you can't actually say this doesn't suit my conscience and I think it's wrong for my child. So that's incredibly authoritarian, actually. And then I think there've been concerns as well about cohesion with regard to extremist opinions, be it religious extremism or what people say are far-right opinions. There's been concern about whether British values are being taught properly. Government, the Department for Education, third sector charities, the teaching unions, they're all having quite a big say and a powerful grab over this for various different reasons, actually. And there's a great fear that parents might, you know, be giving their children views that aren't going to adhere to what is really a hegemonic liberal reading that the main establishment powers have wanted to stay in place. And so let's call it, you know, the ideas of multiculturalism or kind of, liberal gender politics and all of that. You know, in order that parents don't teach their children the wrong idea and that children don't spread that wrong idea amongst themselves, there is a controlling force, I think, coming in through schools.
It's crazy, really, this idea that, you're not bringing your children up properly, we'll take over. It's quite terrifying.
It's extremely terrifying. When parents are abusive, we want the state to step in. I don't think anybody would disagree that a community should come together where a child is being harmed, and but we have to have a standard or a point at which we recognise that's happened and a formality to moving into that space where we say, there is evidence of some harm here, and we're going to change things round to put the state with primacy over the parents in this very special situation. All else should not be open for state intervention, in my view. The state is not here to shape the politics of the future. In fact, when states do that, it's always been incredibly bad news, very, very dangerous outcomes. Mao's Red Guard, Hitler Youth, and everything in between. If the state trains a whole cohort of children to think in the same way on an ideological basis, you have a danger coming in the future where a very large cohort of youth are going to think something. And I think that is a genuine risk, actually. And we, in a way, even though some families may have bad ideas or good ideas, the fact that it is plural and that each of these families is one unit bringing new ideas into civilization together is actually very, very protective from having one big and dangerous ideology. And so no matter how well schools think that they can teach a whole nation what their moral basis should be or their political basis should be, it's wrong to try. And that's why we've actually got some brilliant laws actually against indoctrination, which are in the Education Act, so section 406, 407. They very clearly say that indoctrination of children into partisan political views is illegal or unlawful, I think is the correct way. And we should be enforcing that, but we're not.
What do you think we can do as a people to kind of protect our children from this?
Parents should be in good contact with their school in a civil way, constructive complaints, asking to see things, being involved, becoming a governor, and speaking freely on these matters. Some areas will be have quite strong political biases, and schools are obviously based in catchment areas. And so that can be very, very difficult. I certainly experienced that, where I wasn't welcome to voice alternative opinions in the PTA or to teachers. And I think parents and actually other parents were scared to do so. Right. And that was very clear to me that they couldn't voice their views. And so schools were getting a very limited view of what the parents thought about this. So we have to stand up, say when we think there's something not quite right, be constructive about it, ask to see what's going on, and really look at the curriculum. And that's part of helping a kid learn anyway. So it should be welcomed, and if a school isn't welcoming it, well then it's probably not doing its safeguarding properly.
Clare Page, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.